so much for having me, Peter, and all the other organisers, Sarah and Hannes. My name is Jo Franchetti, and as Peter said, I am an engineering manager at Trainline. You can find me at This Is Jo Frank on Twitter, or you can find my team at Trainline team. And it's really awesome to be here today. So today I would like to help you to leave the web better than you found it, or to be the heroes of the web. And I should warn you that this whole talk is loosely based around a pun that I came up with while I was talking to my colleagues, while I was working with Peter. I don't know if many of you have seen the Samsung Internet team, but a lot of us at the time had brightly coloured hair. And somebody said that we were a little bit like the Power Rangers. And because we all advocate for PWAs, I then coined the term PWA Rangers, and so the theme was born. For those of you who aren't as old as me, and perhaps weren't watching Saturday morning TV in the early 2000s, the Power Rangers were a crime-fighting team of colourful superheroes who fought aliens with giant mechanical dinosaurs that could morph together. So I hope that's cleared that all up for you. So, on to becoming the heroes of the web. But first, we need to know what we're fighting for. So as developers, as business owners, as people who might have a product, a service, or a brand, we want other people to use the thing that we're building. We want their interaction with our products to be pleasant, we want it to be nice and easy, and we want them to feel engaged when they're using the product, engaged enough to continue using it and to come back. And we want people to be able to find our content easily. The easier to find, the more likely it is that you're going to get more users. And we want people to be able to save our content and take it with them, and then have it at their fingertips when they're out and about. And this means that we're asking them to download something. And depending on what country they're in, and what kind of contract they're on, and what kind of device they have, we could potentially be asking them to spend a not insignificant amount of money to download and use our products. And I'd like you to just take a look at this slide here. I don't know how clearly you can all see that. This is a slide from Bruce Lawson from a talk that he gave at a conference called Delta V. But it shows the number of hours that people from different countries have to work in order to afford 500 meg of data. So down at the bottom there, we've got Germany, who have to work about 1 hour. Then we've got the US at 5.7. In South Africa, it takes 18 hours to afford 500 meg of data. In Nigeria, it takes 28.2, and in Brazil, it takes 34.4 hours to afford 500 meg of data. That's a week's worth of work to afford 500 meg of data. So not only are we potentially costing them a huge amount of money if our downloads are huge, but often the connections that they're on are incredibly slow. The world isn't on the 2G connections that we're used to. Sometimes they're on 2G, sometimes they're on much worse. A lot of Central America is on dial-up speed internet. So it's super important that we keep the size of the things that we're building as small as we can when we're developing products that we want the entire world to be using. But we don't have to just take the cost of data into consideration. We want our users to download something and actually keep it on their phone, which means that we're asking them to give us valuable space in their storage. And many of these users aren't going to have the latest iPhone or Pixel or Samsung or whatever it is. They're going to be using older and cheaper phones. They're going to be much less well-spec'd, and they're going to have a lot less storage. What you're essentially asking your user to choose between is photos of their family or your app. Guess which one they're going to choose? So a tool that many companies are using to give them this engagement and discoverability and ease of taking it with you is building an app. And there is quantitative proof that building an app does increase engagement. Users spend the majority of the time on their phone in apps as opposed to in the browser. These first two here are links with a whole load of data on behavior with regards to how users spend their time on their desktop versus their phone, and I will tweet these out if you're interested in them. It's quite an interesting read. And the nice thing about apps is that they give us a reliable, slick user interface. There's no interruptions, there's no reason why the user would leave the thing that you've built for them. There's no browser UI, there's no unrelated content, you've got them caught within your product. And writing a native app gives you the opportunity to use the device hardware. So if you want to use things like the user's location, you can find that out with permission, of course. If you want to use their camera or get details from their address book or connect to other devices, you can turn on the flash on the back of the phone. You can get data from the accelerometers and the motion sensors, all these kinds of things you can do when you build an app. And apps are also able to send notifications, so we can re-engage our users when they're not in our app. You could be like, hey, remember us? Maybe you want to come back. And it's a nice way to engage without your content getting lost in maybe an email spam filter. And apps can also work offline, which is super important when you're in that thing that most developers find the most infuriating, which has been called Li-Fi, where you have a Wi-Fi connection, but there's just not quite enough data, and you're getting everything's coming down at like grindingly slow speed. 71% of the world is on a 2G and not a 3G connection. 71%. So we need to be building things that have an offline experience, because they're going to be regularly in this sort of Li-Fi kind of situation where their connection is just not enough to get the download down. And apps can store data which you can show to your users whether or not they have a network connection. But of course, there are also downsides to building an app. So for starters, you have to actually build the app. And now I'm making assumptions here, but I'm assuming that most of us are web developers. Yeah? So how many of you can write HTML and CSS? Good. And JavaScript? Yeah. How about Java? Or C? C++? So in order to write an app, we potentially have to learn a new language. But then we learn this new language and then we find out that it only works on one type of device. So hang on, we have to learn a whole other language? Well, that sounds a bit silly. I'm just going to pay somebody to do it for me. But they want how much money to build this app for me? This is silly. Writing app is quite expensive in salaries, in developer time, in testing, in maintaining. And it's enough to make you consider whether or not you just want to stick with a website and forget all about making an app. And if you do decide to take on the cost of making an app, it isn't a surefire thing that you're going to get the engagement that you're hoping you were going to get in the first place. Your app may never actually reach the devices of the public. Comscore did a survey that says that approximately 50% of mobile users download 0 apps a month. I mean, think about it. How many apps have you downloaded recently? Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of head shaking. Not many apps. Also, for your users who are potentially on an expensive data connection or don't have the most up-to-date phone, they're not going to download your app if it's big. The average app size is 34.4 meg. If we remember our 500 meg costs, that's just really not appropriate for a lot of people. So there must be some sort of in-between, something that can give us the engagement of an app, but the size of a website. If not, our users are never going to see our apps. If only there was a better way. Enter the progressive web app. Progressive web apps give us the reach of the web, but the stickiness of an app. Again, the Comscore reported that the web reaches 3 times as many people as mobile apps. It's morning time. But once downloaded, people spend more time in apps than they do in the browser. Making a PWA means that you've got the reach of those who are searching on the web, but once they've downloaded your app and saved it to their phone, you get that nice stickiness. Your app is also linkable, so from your website you can say, hey, visit our PWA, and then they can download it from their phone. So you're not only getting the search, but you can also get it into app stores and any other way that you might normally get people to an app. And even though your users come to your app through the web, once they've visited, we can use JavaScript to give them a very app-like experience and to save data offline. And PWAs are written in the languages that we already know. In fact, with a few modifications, the website that you have probably already written can and should be a PWA. And that's a lot of development time saved. But even though they're written in HTML, we can use things like the web app manifest in order to hide the browser, to give it a look like an app. And we can make the whole app full screen, just like our normal native app experience. And progressive web apps are installable, but their size is much smaller than your average app. We're talking a few kilobytes instead of a few meg. And once installed, the user will be able to see the icon on their home screen, they'll be able to open it, they'll use it exactly like an app. As far as the user is concerned, it is an app. And with new APIs arriving in the browser, we've got access to some, sadly not quite all, of the services that native apps have. So we can send notifications, we can get GPS data, we can connect to the camera, we can play audio, we can do face detection, we've got Bluetooth, we've got VR and AR, we can do motion detection. So, how do PWAs work? Well, first, to be considered a progressive web app, your website has to be progressive. It has to be built with the idea of progressive enhancement at its core. And we want our app to be able to work for all of our users, regardless of what device they're using or what browser they're using. So it has to be responsive, because we don't know whether they're going to be looking at it on a watch, or a phone, or a desktop, or a fridge. Sorry. So yes, it has to be able to fit any form factor. It also has to be served over HTTPS. Using a secure connection is going to prevent your man-in-the-middle attacks, where third parties can attack even after your user has made a connection with the server. And it has to have a web app manifest, which is going to give us the layout rules for how we want the browser to look. So this is where we can do things like hide the browser Chrome, or change the color of the browser Chrome. The browser Chrome, for those of you who don't know, is the UI part of the browser, so where your address bar and your back and forward buttons are and all that. The manifest is also where we can do things like link to icons, which are going to show up on the home screen. It's where we can style up the loading page, the splash page it's called, and it's where we'll put the name of the app so that when it shows up on the icon on our home screen, that will be in there, and I'll show you an example of a manifest in a second. It also has to, there we go, HTTPS manifest. It also has to use a service worker, which is going to be only available over your HTTPS connection. If you don't have HTTPS, your service worker will not work. And it's a type of web worker, so it's essentially JavaScript that runs in the background away from your main browser thread. So let's have a look at both a web app manifest and a service worker. So the manifest is what allows your users to download your website to their home screen, and creating a manifest and linking it to your page are very straightforward. It's exactly the same as you would link your CSS, but instead of style sheet, your rel attribute is going to say manifest, and you can call the manifest whatever you like. Most people use manifest.json. And it's going to hold all the metadata about your app and define how you want the app to display. The best way to understand it is to actually have a look at one. So here is an example web app manifest for the vitally important app, Biscuit Tinder. So what have we got here? We've got a name. We've named our app Biscuit Tinder. The short name is what is going to display on the home screen. Then we have the display. I've said standalone, which means that I want to hide the browser Chrome. So I want it to look like an app. I've given it a start URL, which is where it's going to take you to when you open the app. The theme color would style the browser Chrome. The background color is the color of the splash screen that loads while your app is loading. The orientation says which way around you want the app to load. And then we've got our list of icons, so we can say, put a whole load, we can put an entire array of icons in here, which will be chosen depending on the resolution of the device that they're using. So this is an example of Biscuit Tinder, and you can manually verify whether or not your manifest was set up correctly. If you go to the manifest tab on the application tab of Chrome DevTools, so here's an example of the one that I built. So if you open the manifest option under application, at the top you should see all of the information that you put into your manifest. And if you would like to rate your favorite biscuits, you can do so at biscuittinder.glitch.me. So let's next talk about service workers. So a service worker is a script that your browser runs in the background. As I mentioned earlier, they're a special kind of web worker, so they don't run on the main thread, and they don't have access to the DOM. Instead, they communicate with pages using their post message interface. And service workers can intercept network requests and then cache data using the cache API, or retrieve resources from the cache using the fetch API. And they're also responsible for delivering the push notifications that are so vital for our PWAs. Service workers are the thing that allows us to offer an offline experience. So by getting that data from the network, storing it in the cache, next time we're offline, we can take it out of the cache and they can still use the app. They might not even know that they're offline. So how do we use them? So in order to use a service worker on your site, the first thing that you want to do is check whether or not service workers are actually supported by the browser that you're using. Sadly, service worker isn't supported by all browsers yet. Maybe soon. And then you need to register the service worker, which you will do in your page's JavaScript, like this. And by registering, what you're saying is, my service worker is in this location. That's basically it. And it will load the service worker from there. After the registration step is when you're going to use the service worker to do things like cache your static assets. And if all the files are cached successfully, then the service worker will become installed. If it fails for any reason, maybe there's an error in your service worker, or you haven't pointed it to the right place, then all that will happen is that your files won't cache. And it'll try again the next time. So as far as your user is concerned, your website will still work. They might not get the offline experience that they were expecting, but if it does install successfully, then you will know that you have those static assets in the cache. And then after the installation step is the activation step. And this is when you might want to do things like handle the management of the cache. So you might, depending on what kind of website you're building, make decisions about whether or not you want to update the cache or leave it as it is. So, as I said, service workers offer us the potential to offer an offline experience, but we need to think about what kind of offline experience we might want that to be. And we can use different caching strategies depending on what kind of offline experience we're talking about. So, if you've got a site that is unlikely to be updated much, we could use something called a cache-first approach, which is where we fall back to the network if there's nothing in the cache. So the first time they visit your site, we'll put the data in the cache. If we know that we're not going to update our website very often, maybe it's our own personal website and we've got our CV on there and we're not planning on touching that, leave it in the cache. Next time they come to look at the app, we just go directly to the cache. We don't even talk to the network. So that is the cache-first approach. If you've got a lot of updates, for example, maybe a breaking news feed, which wants to be as up-to-date as possible, but also show the most recent data that was collected last time the user was online. Then you might use this the network first approach with the cache fallback. So we go to the network, we check whether or not there's data. If there is, we get it. If there isn't, we just give them whatever it was that they got last time they were here. If we just want to get something to the user as quickly as possible, we might use the network cache race approach, which will show whichever responds first, either the network or the cache. This will obviously be quite dependent on what network connection they're on and what kind of a phone they've got. So if they've got a very speedy phone, the cache might return first. If they've got quite a slow device, the network might return first. And then if you've made a static site that you're not planning on changing at all, you could use a, oh no, this is not, we've got cache only, yeah. You could use a cache only approach. So once they've connected, they get the cache, and we never ever even bother going back to the network because we're never going to update this website. And if there's no way that you ever want to serve data from the cache, because your website is changing so constantly that you always want to go to the network, then you would use the network-only approach. And I've seen some really lovely examples of different use cases from people sort of listening to audio offline or providing a little game to play when you're in offline mode. You don't always have to offer your app experience, you can just give them some entertainment or something that indicates to them that they're in the right place. I'm sure we all know and love Chrome's offliner store. Or I heard it called something else the other day.
Dinosaur Game of Sadness.
Yeah, okay, Dinosaur Game of Sadness will do. And it's really fun, but the problem with the Dinosaur Game of Sadness is that for people who are less au fait with the internet in general, it can be quite confusing. You know, they've typed in like BBC, whatever, and suddenly they're presented with a game where the dinosaur's jumping over cactuses and they don't really know what has happened. If we can present them with something branded, that's a much nicer experience for them. Suddenly they know that they're in the right place. You can say, you know, here's our brand, you're offline, why not play Sudoku? And if you want to be able to debug whether or not your service worker is working, then both Chrome and Firefox offer useful debugging tools right in the browser. So this is again in the Chrome application tab. Under service workers, you can see your registered service worker, you can see its status, whether or not it's activated and running. And you can unregister them, you can update them, you can even emulate a push event from right inside the browser, which is super awesome. And of course, Firefox also has some great tools. So if you go to About Debugging and then click on the Workers tab, you'll be able to unregister your worker from right inside of Firefox. I think you can also simulate a push event in Firefox these days. So this has been a pretty whirlwind tour of PWAs, and we've not gone into much detail on any of it. So if you're feeling overwhelmed or feeling like you want to learn more, don't worry. There's a whole load of apps and tools out there that can help you get started. These are the heroes that you're going to need. So first of all, Lighthouse, which I'm sure many of you have already looked at, which is also under the Audits tab in Chrome Inspect. You'll be able to, it'll give you a whole checklist of actions that you need to take in order to turn your website into a PWA, which is kind of brilliant. It's literally just a step-by-step, like install the manifest, install the service worker, make sure that your website is responsive, host it on HTTPS. There's also SonarWall, which is a linting tool which will help you improve your performance, your accessibility, your security, and all the important steps to make your app into the best PWA that it can be. And there's also a tool called PWA Builder, which is so good, and it will build you a manifest, it will build you a service worker, it'll even generate all the icons that you need for all the different Screen resolutions, it's really awesome. So we mentioned one thing that we haven't talked about is push notifications. And with a registered service worker, we are now able to send push notifications. But push notifications aren't a requirement for being a PWA. But they are a great example of one of those native app things that we can now bring into the web. And when used carefully, they can be really awesome for re-engagement. The idea of a push notification is it is a timely, informative message to send to your user. Timely and informative being the important words here. Now, push notifications rely on our service worker plus two other APIs, the notification API and the push API. The notification API is what's going to display your notifications, and the push API is what's going to handle sending the messages from the server. In order to send push notifications, the first thing that we have to do is get permission from the user. The notification.request permission call will display an allow deny prompt to the user first, and we've likely all already seen that. But once you have permission, then you can send notifications with a text and an icon, and the option to play a vibration pattern if you want on the user's device. And because service workers aren't tied to the lifetime of the browser tab, you can give your users actions to follow even if they're not in your app. And sure, support isn't everywhere yet. We still don't have the push API in Safari. There have been noises along those lines, maybe in the near future. But the browsers and devices that do support push notifications will show you a push notification. The browsers that don't won't. And that's kind of okay. So let's have a look at the support for, firstly, service workers. So you might have heard people say that PWAs don't work in all browsers, but it's actually not bad. There's quite a lot of green in this graph, and sure, PWAs aren't supported everywhere, but that's the whole point of the name progressive. By adding the enhancements that are necessary to make your website a PWA, all you're doing is improving the user experience for those users who do have browsers that will support a PWA, and you're improving your performance in the process, so it's really not a bad thing. The browsers that support it will give them the extra features, the browsers that don't won't. So we talked about web app manifests and how they allow you to download to the home screen. This is just an example of what that looks like in two different browsers. So when people visit your website, they will get a prompt. The prompt in Chrome looks like this. It says add to home screen. When the user clicks that, that's when they will download the app to their phone and see the icon on the home screen. This is what it looks like in Samsung Internet for equalness. It used to be the case that when you visited a PWA, it would automatically do this. Now you have to prompt this by using the before install prompt event. The reason for this is that we're making our users quite annoyed at us. I don't know if you have ever felt like this. For those of you who can't read, dear website, I don't want you to post notifications to my desktop. I don't want to subscribe to your thing via a pop-up. I don't want you to know my location. Please stop auto-playing that video. I'm so angry and sad right now. And so one of the important messages that I would like to leave with you is that we need to be considerate of our users. We want them to engage with our app, and by sending push notifications, we want them to sort of come back and feel good about our app. But we're making them angry, so we don't want to be sending notifications too often. So we really want to be considering whether or not the push notification is timely and whether it is informative. Does your user want to hear from you at this point, and are you sending them things that they want to hear? Let's not bombard our users. And while I am on the topic of notification spam, another thing that we really want to bear in mind is when we're building apps that need permissions to use things like the user's location or use their camera, we need to consider whether or not they're actually engaged with us enough to give us that permission, and whether or not they trust us enough to give us that permission. And maybe we need to start considering whether or not we should send those notifications as soon as they land on our app, because they might not even know who we are at that point. Give them a chance to get to know you, and then let them decide whether or not they want to give you access to their camera or their location, or whatever else. We're bored of instantly being asked for these permissions. And leaping on your users while they're unsuspecting is not being the heroes of the web. That's being the baddies. That's going to make them really frustrated with your brand and less engaged. Build up the trust and loyalty first, then you can send them push notifications, and then you can ask for permissions. So, you've written your PWA, you've got your manifest and your service worker, you're serving it over HTTPS, your users can find your site, they can download it to their home screen, and that's awesome. But what else is there? So have a quick think about how you would normally find an app. You'd go to the App Store, right? And users have gotten used to the idea that if they want an app, they're going to search for it in the App Store. This behavior is something that we really can't ignore if we want to be building an app-like experience. And luckily, a whole load of App Store providers are now supporting PWAs in their app stores. And sure, there are a few hoops that you have to jump through in order to get your app into each store. Sometimes you'll have to package the app, and for some of them you're going to have to spend a bit of cash to actually get it in there. But it's really awesome that they're actually supporting PWAs in app stores. We can build websites and get them into app stores. We can get that extra discoverability, not only from search, but also from the stores. And PWA Builder that I mentioned before will also help you doing packaging if you want to get your app into the app stores. Yeah. This lot are all supporting PWAs in their app stores. Windows are actually putting in a super amount of effort into getting PWAs into their app stores. They will actually crawl your site, and if they see it's a PWA, they will automatically put it into the Windows store, which is amazing. So you write a good PWA, you don't even have to try and get it into the store, they put it there for you, which is pretty cool. Oh yeah, I mentioned PWA Builder. So, we said that PWAs are downloadable on your phone, but that's not it. They can also work on your desktop. Chrome currently offers the ability to install PWAs onto your machine, which will add a shortcut to your desktop, which is launchable just like you would launch any other app on your machine. And the same thing counts with apps in the Windows Store. They are also installable on your machine. You can add the icons to your start menu, your app menu, your desktop, wherever you want, just like any other app on your machine. So I hope you're all convinced about the benefits of making a PWA and will consider building one as an option. And if you're convinced but you're worried that maybe you might need a little bit of help with a convincing argument for your project manager, your product manager, your business colleagues, then take a look at this website called PWA Stats, which is a whole list of real-life stats from people in our community who have made their websites into PWAs and the improvements that they've seen in performance, accessibility, engagement, revenue, file size, conversion, you name it, it's on there. There are hundreds of examples. And with the pretty excellent browser support, the advantages in cost and dev time, the potential gains to performance and usability, I think we should all consider thinking about building a PWA. And remember, go PWA Rangers!